Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah al-aliy al-azim. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Abil Qasim al-Mustafa Muhammad. وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم. اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to continue our study of Tahrifat of Ashura by the late Ayatullah Mutahhari. As you remember, we said there are two types of tahrif. One is linguistic or literal, it's lafzi. Means some words are added or deleted. So this is very harmful, but what is more destructive is ma'navi, is semantic, is when the whole idea is distorted. The meaning is changed. Interpretation is, done without facts. So in lecture 2, Ayatullah Mutahhari talks about factors that lead to tahrif. But then from lecture 3, he talks about tahrif ma'navi. He expands on tahrif ma'navi. So because we follow the order of the book, so we also today discuss the factors, and then inshallah, after that we talk about tahrif ma'navi or semantic. The factors that lead to tahrif or distortion are sometimes general, sometimes specific. General factors are those that can be found in different cultures, different parts of the world, different topics. They are very common. But specific factors can be only relevant to one case, maybe not necessarily other cases. So, for example, in our case, we have some special reasons for tahrif that are only about the story of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But the general ones can be found in other cases as well. The first general factor is the plan of enemies of that personality or that movement or that religion. Whatever subject is distorted, sometimes there are people who are hostile towards it and they deliberately try to do tahrif. So it's out of enmity. Maybe you say, isn't it that all kinds of tahrif is done by enemies? You say no. Actually, many times tahrif can be done by ignorant friends or by people who have, exaggerated ideas. So it's not that always enemies do tahrif. So one general factor is what the enemies do. They have plans, they have purpose in this, thwarting the message. With the case of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his movement and martyrdom, the story of Karbala, right from the beginning, there was attempt to misrepresent it to the public. Even before Imam Hussein alayhi salam was killed. Ayatullah Mutahhari, for example, says that when Muslim ibn Aqil moved towards Kufa, so Yazid asked Ibn Ziyad to take care of this, and in his instruction he said, Muslim, the son of Aqil, has come to Kufa to cause mischief and corruption. Like, you know what Pharaoh used to say to people about Musa alayhi salam. Yeah, that he has come to change your religion. He has come to take over the power. So Yazid said to Ibn Ziyad that Muslim has come to cause division and corruption. Also, when Ibn Ziyad arrested Muslim ibn Aqil and took him to Darul Imara and wanted to kill him, he said that, why you have come to this city? People were living here peacefully, and you have come here and divided people, caused, unrest. And Muslim ibn Aqil said, I haven't come here myself. People have invited me. There are lots of letters, and I have those letters with me. And people were complaining about injustice that your father Ziyad used to do, etc. So enemies try to misrepresent, and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam try to explain, and their followers also the same. So this is something that we have it from the beginning. But this, alhamdulillah, has not been very successful, because first of all, what Yazid and people who were on his side did was so brutal and so much, unacceptable, that there was no way someone would justify what they did. Plus, Imam Hussein alayhi salam on many occasions made very clear what were the reasons. Inshallah, we will talk about it. And then Lady Zainab, Salamullah alayha, Imam Zainul Abidin, and other people. So they didn't let a kind of vacuum that the enemies try to fill it with their own interpretation. So this is one general factor. Maybe it has played some role in some parts of Muslim Ummah, but in general, not that much. The second general factor is a tendency that people have, that they want to sometimes create, supernatural heroes for themselves. They want to, create some kind of personalities that are above, ordinary human beings. And they can do it for their scholars, for their political leaders, or even scholars. For example, Ayatullah Mutahhari says, we find that sometimes there are exaggerations about Ibn Sina, Avicenna. For sure, he was very great, philosopher and scientist. But some people exaggerate even about his ability of hearing, for example, or seeing. He says, for example, that they say that Ibn Sina at some point used to be in Isfahan for a study. Isfahan and Kashan are maybe about 3 hours distance, 2 hours, 3 hours distance. In Kashan, they used to, do with hand some work on, copper, meskari, like to make tray or whatever. They say Ibn Sina said that when in the night I am trying to study, what they do in Kashan doesn't let me focus. It's 2-3 hours distance. And they say, one night they asked, without telling Ibn Sina, they asked people not to work in Kashan, and then next day he said, last night was very good, very quiet. He says this is not acceptable. Sometimes, uneducated people, may say this because they have this tendency that they want to make someone very special, someone that they love. They want to raise him to a very supernatural level. Or they say that, for example, someone was coming and he was about 6 kilometers or 5.5 kilometers away. And they say, Ibn Sina said, he is eating bread which is, for example, sweet. They ask him, how did you realize from 5.5 kilometer? He said, because I saw there are some flies around him. These flies must be attracted by sweet bread. So he says, how can from 5.5 kilometer you see the flies? Okay? So, this is not what Ibn Sina claimed for himself. This is what some people, say, and some people accept. So, this happens in different cultures. You see, exaggerations happen. And many times, actually, these things are said after the person dies. If he himself was alive, maybe he was correcting. They claim, things about people that, sometimes it's unbelievable. But as long as it's an ordinary person or, someone like Ibn Sina, a scholar, or, it's okay. It's not okay, but it's not too harmful. But if it is done for a religious leader, especially for imams, for prophets, that we take them as our role models and we want to follow them for everything, it becomes very more destructive. It's not good for even other people, but if someone does something about Imam Ali alayhi salam or Imam Hussein alayhi salam or prophet, would be very more destructive. He mentions a story that they say about Amirul Mu'minin alayhi salam. For sure, we all know of bravery act of Amirul Mu'minin in Khaybar, in the Battle of Khaybar. And there was a very strong person, Merhab, who had one-to-one battle with Amirul Mu'minin alayhi salam. And he says that some people say that Allah said to Jibreel, go and put your wing under the sandal of Merhab, because the anger that Ali has, if it's not, somehow stopped, when he strikes the sword, would not only kill Merhab, would make the earth half. So put your wing there so that you would stop the sword of Ali. Otherwise can, make the earth twice, half. And then he says, they say, of course, I have not heard this story myself. Maybe, at that time was said. Because, alhamdulillah, many of these things are not, anymore said. And then he says, then the wing of Jibreel, they say, was injured. And for 40 days, Jibreel was not able to go back. Had to look after, his wing, and then after 40 days, he went back and, said that this has happened to me. So Ayatullah Mutahhari says, what is this? This is very destructive. And maybe some ignorant people, have done this, and some other ignorant people have reported, narrated, spread it. Or, for example, they say, uh, Amir al-Mu'mineen, when had his strike on Mirhab, so the sword made him half, but so quick that Mirhab didn't notice. And he said, you didn't manage to do anything to me. And then Imam Ali said, move a little bit. Then when he moved, he was falling apart. So he says, this is nonsense. And imagine if these things reach a non-Shia, they may think this is what the Shia scholars are saying, what their, I don't know, Hawzas are telling them. But it's good that we say that we are the first people to criticize such things. But as I said, alhamdulillah, I have not heard this in all my life, So maybe these were said in the past in some small scales. Then he quotes from Haji Nuri in Lu'lu Marjan, the same book. For example, about Hazrat Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. They say that, a small maybe group, that he was in the Battle of Siffin, and he says, Haji Nuri says that in Battle of Siffin, Hazrat Abu al-Fadl must be 15 years old. But they say he was very brave, and one of the things he did was that he threw 80 people to the sky, one after the other. And then when the 80th, he threw to the sky, the first came down and he killed. So he killed 80 people in this way. He said, this doesn't make sense because, he was 15 years old and we don't have any report of this. And this is just exaggerated, ideas that some people say. So, the second factor for tahrif is when some people, out of emotions or I don't know, a tendency for creating supernatural, heroes, they do things like this. And he says that some Europeans say that exaggeration is more in the East. Eastern people maybe have more tendency towards, exaggeration. And he says maybe it's right that there is such tendency. In Asrar al-Shahada, that we will talk about it later tonight, inshallah, the author, who is Mullah Aghay Darbandi, as we said also before, he says Omar Saad had 600,000 people riding and 1 million people on the feet. So it means 1.6 million people. He said how much Kufa had population. Because Kufa was just built in the time of second Caliph. So the second Caliph, in order to have a military base near Iran, he made Kufa. It was called Kufatul Jund. Later, Amir al-Mu'mineen moved, there. So in a matter of 35 years, how could Kufa be so populated that can have 1.6 million army? Even, a city of 10 million, 15 million, it's difficult to have 1.6 million army. There is a beautiful hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. He quotes the hadith, but he doesn't say where is it from, because he was in a lecture. But this is a hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. You can find it, for example, in Ma'an al-Akhbar, volume 1, page 33. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam in this hadith refers to how some people do distortions. We will talk about tahrif al-ma'navi and use this example. Ammar, the son of Yasir, was a great companion of Prophet and Amirul Mu'minin alayhi salam. Prophet told to Ammar, Ya Ammar, taqtuluka al-fi'atul baghiyah. O Ammar, you will be killed by an unjust group. Okay? And people had heard this from Rasulullah. So they had great respect for Ammar because they knew that Ammar is going to become martyr and will be killed by unjust people. When in Siffin, in the battle of Siffin, Ammar was killed, people who knew this, they wanted to uprise against Muawiyah. And they went to, talk about this to Muawiyah and his people. And then Muawiyah was, so vicious that he found a trick. He said, yes, this is true. He couldn't say this is not true because hundreds of people had heard this who were present or had heard it indirectly. But he said, Ali has killed him. Because Ali brought Ammar here. So Ali is the killer and his party is Al-Fi'atul Baghiyah. Okay? So we will talk about it later. So Imam Sadiq alayhi salam refers to this. And he says that this tahrif, this distortion, is something that has similar cases like this. And he says if this was the meaning, then the killer of Hamza was also Rasulullah. Yeah, because then pagans should say that we didn't kill Hamza, it was Rasulullah who brought him to the battle. And then Imam Sadiq quoted a hadith from the Prophet. Ayatullah Mutahhari just mentions this sentence, but this is what Imam Sadiq quotes from the Prophet. يحمل هذا العلم من كل خلف عدولا وينفون عنه تحريف الغالين وانتحال المبطلين وتأويل الجاهلين. Rasulullah said that in every generation, this is also Bashara, in every generation there would be some people who carry this knowledge, the true knowledge. In every generation there are people who carry this true knowledge and they would defend it against distortions of ghalin, those who exaggerate, وانتحال المبطلين, and they also protect it from people of falsehood to steal it, وَتَعْوِيلَ الْجَاهِلِينَ, and ignorant people to misinterpret it. So sometimes there are people who exaggerate and damage. Sometimes there are people who are Ahlul Batil and they deliberately want to hijack. And sometimes there are ignorant people who bring their own interpretations. So Rasulullah said in every generation there are carriers of knowledge that they prevent knowledge to be harmed by these groups. Okay? So this is a kind of bishara that alhamdulillah there is a group that would defend the truth. So these are two general factors we talked about. These are, as we said, things that you can find in other cases as well, any case of distortion. Sometimes enemies do something. Sometimes there is exaggeration by people who love that idea or that person or that thing. But now we go to the specific or exclusive factors. In the case of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we have exceptional emphasis on remembrance of the tragedy of Karbala and remembering Imam Hussein alayhi salam, mourning for Imam Hussein, crying for Imam Hussein, organizing events for Imam Hussein. So we have great emphasis on Imam Hussein alayhi salam and his movement. Okay? From the Prophet, from Amirul Mu'mineen, Imam Hassan. So before his martyrdom, after his martyrdom, there is great emphasis on commemoration of tragic event of Ashura. So, why this is there? Some people, unfortunately, have not understood the reason or didn't want to understand. And when they are faced with such great emphasis and such great, level of attention given to this event, then they have tried to channel it to wrong directions. Instead of understanding what Imam Hussein himself said and what is the philosophy of his movement and why the Prophet and Imam so much emphasized on, mourning for Imam Hussein, they channeled it to wrong direction. Imam Hussein himself has very clearly said, and we talk about it inshallah later, some of the sentences of Imam Hussein alayhi salam which are very clear and convey his message. For example, ألا ترون أن الحق لا يعمل به والباطل لا يتناهى عنه. Don't you see that the truth is not acted upon and falsehood is not refrained from? It's a matter of haqq and batil, truth and falsehood. In such situation, لِيَرْغَبِ الْمُؤْمِنُ فِي لِقَاءِ اللَّهِ مُحِقًّا. Then a believer should be eager to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give his life and not remain indifferent towards batil taking over, for example. Or he said, الْمَوْتُ أَوْلَى مِنْ رُكُوبِ الْعَارِ. Death is better than losing your honor and dignity. Or لا أرى الموت إلا سعادة والحياة مع الظالمين إلا برما. He said, I don't see death except as happiness, felicity. And living with unjust people is, not acceptable. Or hayhat min nadhillah. Or even on very difficult occasions, for example, when he is facing the army of enemy, he says, ألا وإن الدعي يبنى الدعي قد ركضني بين اثنتين بين السلة والذلة حيهات من الذلة يأبى الله ذلك لنا ورسوله وحجور طابت وطهرت. So he says, this person has given me the choice of either fighting or being humiliated. And there is no way that I would accept to be humiliated. So they have not left no peaceful way, solution. So in many, many cases, Imam Hussein has explained why he has done this, what was the purpose. But there are things that they do, unfortunately, to damage and distort this important movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Before we go further, he refers again to Haji Nuri. He says, Haji Nuri in Lu'lu' Marjan says that some people have said that there is so much reward for mourning for Imam Hussein and for crying for Imam Hussein that would justify wrong things and wrong practices. So if, for example, you are reciting Matam for Imam Hussein, they say, it's so great that you are doing this that if you say wrong things, it doesn't bother and doesn't, trouble. This is the idea of, Ayatullah Mutahhari says, people like Machiavelli, that they say, ends justify means. But he says, this is not acceptable. If we look at things in this way, then it ends up with damaging the whole religion. So you can tell lies if you have good reason. You can do all haram. You say, I have a good reason for doing this. For example, he says, one of the things which are Islamically are very important is to bring joy to the heart of believers. إدخال السرور في قلوب المؤمنين. So then can make mockery and say, I want to make people happy. Can make ghaiba and say, I want to make people happy. So this is very wrong. He refers to a story. He says, 10-15 years ago, I went to Isfahan and I had just heard a rose, a kind of matam, that was very shocking. So I asked a great alim in Isfahan, Agha Sheikh Muhammad Hassan Najafabadi. Najafabad is a city near Isfahan. So he said, I asked him about this rose, this particular story. And the story is this, that in the time of Mutawakkil, Mutawakkil was Abbasid Caliph who destroyed Karbala, the shrine of Imam Hussein, and stopped people going for ziyarah, etc. So there was an old lady, they said, that wanted to go for ziyarah, and they arrested her and they cut off her hands and they threw her into the sea. And when they threw her into the sea, she called Hazrat Abbas. And then Hazrat Abbas came and said, came to help her and said, take my, the horse or the sandal. Said, why you don't give me your hand? And he said that because my hand is cut off. And he said, I told him, what is the basis of this story? And he said, actually, I know the exact beginning of this story. So he said, there was a majlis in Isfahan, and this was a majlis which was attended by some ulama and talabi and people. And there were different people who were sitting, for example, on member, whatever, saying rose, and then another person. So there were many people, maybe if I don't make mistake, I think 15 people, something like this, were supposed to, give matam, and everyone was giving matam and sitting there to listen to others. So there was a person who was the last one. And whatever he wanted to say, others have said. Right away, he created this story. And then he said, when in the afternoon I went to another majlis, I heard it myself. So someone loved it and, report. So then that alim said, this is just fabrication. So unfortunately, some people dared, not many, but some people unfortunately dared, that because this is for Imam Hussein and we want people to cry, doesn't matter, what's the way, just we want people to cry. This is absolutely wrong. This is against whole concept of religion and Sharia and moral virtues, and against values that Imam Hussein stood for and gave his life for. And Imam Hussein would be not pleased with anyone who would do these things. But unfortunately, ignorance has no limit. People with ignorance can do different things. We say to Imam Hussein in ziyarah, أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر. Then how can you say to commemorate Imam Hussein, it's okay if, we change realities, we create stories?
But a great sheikh said it.
No, Sheikh didn't say it.
This majlis, a great sheikh said it, so the other one repeated the same thing.
No, it was not great Sheikh. The great Sheikh said that I was there, that one, reciter said this. Yeah. Haji Nuri also says that he heard from one of ulama that when he was young, he was passing through a kind of village in Khurasan, and he went at the time of Salah to Masjid, and then there was Matam. The Imam of the Masjid in that village, when he wanted to start Matam, the caretaker of Masjid brought some stones. They switched off the light, whatever it was, and when he was reciting Matam, the caretaker was throwing stones at people. And everyone was screaming and crying. And then afterwards, he said, what did you do? He said, these people don't cry, so we have to beat them so that they cry. So, this is what, ignorance can do. Then, he refers to two books. One book is Rawzatul Shuhada. Rawza in Arabic means garden. Yeah? Rawza means garden. Riyadh means gardens. For example, we have hadith about grave, about barzakh. Al-qabru imma rawzatun min riyadh al-jannah or hufratun min hufar al-niran. Yeah? Grave is either a garden of gardens of heaven, or it's a hole of hell, temporary heaven and hell. So, Rawzatul Shuhada means garden of martyrs. A person called Mullah Hussein Kashifi, about 500 years ago, he wrote and compiled this book, Rawzatul Shuhada. Ayatullah Mutahhari says this is the first book on Matam in Farsi. Before that, people used to, of course, not people, ordinary people, but ulama, etc., used to use Arabic books. We have many Arabic books. One of the best Arabic books is Irshad by Sheikh Mufid, by great scholar. But when this person compiled this book, it was the first book in Farsi, and he had good writing skills. Then people started reading this book and doing majalis, to the extent that now we say Rozekhani. In Farsi, when we say, we want to do Matam, we say Rozekhani. Okay? This name Rozekhani was not there before this book. So in the time of Imams or great ulamas in the past, no. From the time that this book was written, it became so popular that they say Rozekhani. Okay? Like, for example, now, certain things we use the name of the first producer or brand, say, Kleenex. Kleenex can be now done by others, or in Iran we say Tide, because the first detergent was Tide, So, or Thermos. We use these things now for the whole thing. So Roza Khani meant reading from this book Matam. But this book is full of fake stories, even fake figures. There are names of companions of Imam Hussein that they didn't exist. And Ayatullah Mutahhari says, even we don't know he was Sunni or Shia, because he says when he was with Shia, he was like Shia. When he was with Sunni, he was like Sunni. We don't know, what type of, aqidah he had. He died in 910 after Hijrah, so about 500 years before. Then, what made it worse was another book called Asrar al-Shahada. This is 60, 70 years ago, he says. Of course, you have to add 40 years also. So 60, 70 years from that time is about 100 years ago. A person called Mullah Aghai Darbandi. He compiled a book, Asrar al-Shahada. And this made the situation worse. So now people who have no good knowledge, they say, this is a book. Some people think when something is printed, it is Hujjah. But if it is printed, it's not Hujjah. Haji Nuri has a beautiful, actually, background story about this book, Asrar al-Shahada. Haji Nuri says, when I was attending lectures of my teacher, Sheikh Abdul Hussein Tehrani, he said that one person who was reciter came from the city of Hill and brought a book without, beginning and end, which had, masa'ib. He showed me this book. I said, this book is full of lies. Don't show it to anyone. But unfortunately, this Darbandi got this, added to Rawzat al-Shuhada, made it Asrar al-Shahada.
Excuse me.
Yes.
What is the name of the book brought from him?
From?
From him, which was attached to Rawzat al-Shahada.
This didn't have name. It even didn't have the cover or beginning or end. So he brought a book and gave to him. Is this reliable or not? Agha said, this is not reliable. Don't show it to anyone. But then they found it published. They said it belongs to one of the students of, son of Shahid Sani, but was no any evidence, anything. It was not published. It was just kind of handwriting. Then Ayatullah Mutahhari says that we need really to cry when we hear these things, and says that a person went to one of ulama, which is son of Agha Wahid Behbahani. One of our great ulama is Agha Wahid Behbahani. His son was also alim. He has a book, Al-Maqam. He says, one person went to Agha and said, I had very strange dream. Can you help me with understanding my dream? What was his dream? In dream, he found that with his own teeth, he is chewing the flesh of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Agha thought and then said, do you recite Marsiyah? He said, yes. He said, so either stop reciting or just recite what ulama have written. You have been maybe reading things which are not correct. Yeah. So when we read the story of Karbala, as we said before, there is no need for any lie or fake story or exaggeration. We have so much of documented materials that we can use them. As we said, there are also people who were present either on the side of Imam or the side of the other army, who were writing down the events. For example, Aqabat ibn Sam'an or Uqbat ibn Sam'an can be one of these two pronunciations. He was from Mecca with Imam alayhi salam. And he has written things. He was a slave, and when they captured him, he said, "I am a slave," they set him free. He has written. Also people on the other side, for example, Hamid ibn Muslim was in the army of Umar Sa'd, and he has written. Imam Zainul Abidin himself has reported, he was present. And then he says, there is also wrong story. They say Imam Zainul Abidin was so ill in his tent that when Imam Hussein alayhi salam at the end, went to see him, he asked, "What happened to you and these people?" And they say Imam Hussein said, "We had the battle." Then he says, "What happened to Habib ibn Mazahir?" Imam Hussein said, "He was killed." "What happened to this? What happened to this?" And then he says, "This doesn't make sense. It's not that he was unconscious. He was aware and watching everything. Even at one point he wanted to go to the battle, but they stopped him. They presented as if he was asleep or unconscious and was not understanding anything the whole day." Then he refers to the great personality of Abul Fadl al-Abbas. It seems that it was the night of Tasu'a, so he explains the great character of Abul Fadl al-Abbas and his loyalty to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and how he was called Saqa. He says he was Saqa because he was responsible for bringing water even from before. And he said on different occasions he had gone to bring water, even the night of Ashura. And on that day when he went to get permission to go for battle, Imam alayhi salam, for his own wise reasons, he said, "First go and bring water." And he went, and you know the story. So he refers to some poems by Abul Fadl al-Abbas that explains his great love for Imam Hussein alayhi salam and how he didn't want to have water without Imam and his family having water, and finishes this lecture. In the next lecture, maybe we leave it inshallah for next session, we will discuss more about Tahrif Ma'navi, which is much more destructive, and in particular we will mention two misunderstandings that have happened about the movement of Karbala, inshallah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.